Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You are watching Morning Rush this morning, and this morning we are going to be speaking about Islamic finance and what is going to be happening at the Global Islamic Economy Summit in Dubai on the 5th and the 6th of October. Joining us via Skype is Mustafa Adil, who is the acting head of Islamic finance for Thomson Reuters and is responsible for leading the Islamic finance and Islamic markets business for the organization, providing knowledge solutions and bespoke services to support the continued growth and increasing depth of the Islamic finance industry. We say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to Mustafa Adil, and thank you for joining us.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much for having me.
Before we go on to the issue of Islamic finance in the world, Mustafa, can you give us an insight of your job?
Of course. Basically, what the Islamic finance and Islamic markets team does at Thomson Reuters is that we work with our government and corporate clients to help them in meeting their developmental aspirations within the Islamic finance industry. So the Islamic finance industry is one of the fastest growing segments of the global financial services sector, but it is also significantly underdeveloped. And what we at Thomson Reuters tries to do as an information provider, as a connectivity provider, and as a content provider is to work with our partners to play a facilitative role in helping this development. So whether it is through the provision of information, whether it is through strategic initiatives that we undertake with governments, whatever the role may be, we see ourselves primarily as a facilitator to help in this development.
With regards to Islamic finance and global Islamic finance worldwide, what is the position of the Islamic economy sector worldwide?
So Islamic finance, as I mentioned, is one of the fastest growing segments of the financial services industry. In fact, in most core markets, Islamic finance is growing at twice the rate of the overall financial services industry or the conventional financial services industry. Currently, it stands at about $1.8 trillion. And the vast majority of this comes from Islamic banking, which is deposit-driven banking, which accounts for about $1.3 trillion. To essentially double in the next 6 or 7 years, to grow to 3.2 trillion in that time. And that makes it a very, very significant part of the overall financial service industry. And this is an industry that is attracting not only interest from Muslim majority countries, but also other developed or developing markets which have significant Muslim minority or want to establish themselves as hubs are also trying to access the space. So really it's considered to be one of the most proactive and innovative parts of the financial services industry. And I think in this post-financial crisis climate that we have, a lot of different institutions are looking at alternatives for the traditional way of banking, and Islamic finance holds up very strongly in those conversations and in those circles.
As you've mentioned, Mustafa, with regards to the economic recession that hit the world a few years ago, and many parts of the world still undergoing that economic recession, and you have made mention that the Islamic economy could be doubling in the next year or a few years to come. Looking at the state of the Islamic economy in the world finances position, where do you see the Islamic economy fitting in the future?
So the overall Islamic economy is obviously a very, very significant part of the global economy. I mean, Muslims today represent 1.7 billion people. They're markets that are growing much faster than the global averages, and in fact, much faster than many growing markets. So for example, the OIC countries on average are growing even faster than the BRICS countries. So it's a very, very interesting market to look at. But really, the thing that binds it together as a single macro customer segment is the role that religious values or cultural values play in the economic decision making for Muslims. So a recent Pew survey found that 85% of Muslims consider religion to be very important in their economic decision making. This compared to a response of 50% in the US and some 35% in Europe. So what that really means is that religion and religious values and cultural values are much more significant for Muslim consumers than they are for people in the United States or people in Europe. And because it is the same religious values that go across geographies, these consumers can be treated in a sort of macro customer segment, if you like. And we see that both in Muslim countries and outside Muslim countries are beginning to recognize this and are beginning to target this. So whether it is the world of fashion, whether it is the food industry, whether it is travel, people are standing up and taking notice. And they are putting into place strategies to be able to appropriately address the needs and requirements of this huge consumer segment, which is going to be growing very, very fast. So the Islamic economy is becoming a very significant part of the global economic system, and the largest companies in the world are beginning to stand up and take notice and to, in fact, put into place strategies to be able to address that. And within that, we see Islamic finance as being a key facilitator. It's taken the lead. It's the one that grabs all the headlines. But what you see happening in Islamic finance with different countries entering the space and wanting to establish hubs in this, you see across the world in the food sector, whether it is Australia, Brazil, or any of the traditional food providers, they are putting into place strategies to be able to target this market. We see it in the fashion industry, whether it is brands like Tommy Hilfiger, DKNY, or any of the well-known brands. Everyone is starting to appreciate and to appropriately address the needs of this particular segment.
Mustafa, in your opinion, what is the draw card for many countries to look at Islamic finance?
Sure. So Islamic finance, when we think of Islamic finance, we think of, interest-free banking. But Islamic finance is so much more than that. Islamic finance has certain values inbuilt into it that are attractive universally to the laymen, to the normal consumers, right? So Islamic finance is an industry that economic activity to be behind every transaction that is undertaken. Islamic finance is an industry that steers away from speculation. Islamic finance is an industry that steers away from derivatives and other synthetic instruments. Now, these are values that appeal to everyday individuals. I mean, it makes sense on a universal level. And post-financial crisis, we see more and more people being drawn to this type of non-speculative, non-derivative based banking, which has economic activity at its core. Every transaction that Islamic finance undertakes has to have some kind of economic activity behind it, whether it's an asset, whether it's a transaction, or whether it's a partnership on a risk and reward sharing basis. So this is something that is particularly very attractive to people beyond the core Muslim customer segment that you would traditionally find and you have found previously Islamic banks focusing on. So these are the universal values that Islamic banking needs to portray. Started to do this already, and you see more and more institutions moving away from using faith and being a faith-based system to being a values-based system on universal values that appeal to everybody, not just Muslims.
With regards to the benefits of Islamic finance, Mustafa, do you want to take us through that and what you have seen in the global economy?
Of course. So, the financial crisis is one point of, reference. Fared particularly better than most other conventional banks. We never heard of any Islamic banks that had to be rescued or any Islamic banks that went under. They had, because they were backed by real assets, because they were backed by real economic activity, when the economy suffered, they did suffer, but they did not suffer to the same extent that banks that were over leveraged with various different derivatives and other synthetic products suffered. So the damage was contained and they survived and they grew for the better. But if we look even beyond this, if we look for the past 100 years, and we have institutions at Harvard and Oxford and others who have done this research, what they have found is that companies that are underleveraged and companies that are ethical in their nature, they do not engage in activities that are deemed from a Sharia and non-Sharia point of view to be unethical, like gambling, alcohol, pornography, etc., arms and ammunitions. Over the last 100 years, the companies that fit into this bucket have out metrics. So from an investment point of view, from an economic engagement point of view, there is very tangible evidence going back to at least 100 years to show that companies that are underleveraged and companies that align to certain principles beyond a pure profit maximization motive outperform in the medium and long term over the broader market. And that we feel is a very strong message that is not communicated enough. But this is where we see the value of Islamic finance and Islamic economy and real economic activity can demonstrate not just to the broader community, but also to investors who are looking for a return on their investment.
As you have made mention, we're looking at countries like Brazil, Australia exploring Islamic finance solutions. Recently, we heard the United Kingdom exploring Islamic finance solutions. In your opinion, would we see a move of other countries to do so, knowing the benefits of Islamic finance that you have made mention of?
Definitely. I think that Islamic finance is one of the topics that is on the key agenda of almost every central bank around the world. So, we've mentioned very briefly a couple of these countries, but everybody from China and Hong Kong in the east to, Canada and the United States in the west, all countries are looking at this space. And some countries are looking to get into it, like the UK, at a very significant level across different asset classes. Some countries like Luxembourg are looking at particular niche. So they may be looking at Islamic asset management, or some countries may be looking at sovereign sukuks to fund certain programs, or some companies may be looking at takaful because they want to be established as an insurance base. So you have different levels of interest from certain countries and different levels of participation, but pretty much most of the clients that we speak to, most of the governments that we speak to as Thomson Reuters, their next 5 years, there is always Islamic finance somewhere on the agenda.
From your opinion or position from Thomson and Reuters with regards to Islamic finance, Mustafa, why the current interest or current boom in countries looking at Islamic economy, Islamic finance and Islamic economies?
So there's various reasons why countries would look at Islamic finance. I mean, one of the main ones that has traditionally taken place has been that Islamic finance is potentially a cheap source of funding for the investments that certain governments may want to make. So, for example, when the UK and others were considering launching the sovereign, saw it as a way of diversifying their funding source and to attract a lower cost of funding. But what we've seen more recently, which is very, very innovative, is institutions have found that there's a particular appetite amongst Muslim investors and consumers towards social programs. So you have had the World Bank issue a sukuk to fund vaccinations in poor Muslim countries. Very, very innovative use of this. They're able to raise funds very quickly and much cheaper than conventional because people are investing not only from a return point of view, but also from a social point of view. We have seen Khazana in Malaysia who have used a social fund to fund their educational program. The well received, it was oversubscribed, and it paid lower rates than government borrowing. So, it's a very interesting alternative where a government does not need to go to an international lender to be able to fund its social programs. The government can go directly to the people, and the people have an affinity to the program. They have a benefit from the program, and they're able to put in the funds required to be able to fund those programs. This is, you know, something that is particularly attractive, not just Muslim markets, but also in Western markets. And we see, with the actions of the World Bank in issuing their sukuk, and we're expecting other multilaterals and governments to issue sukuks along these social programs in the coming years as well.
Mustafa, in the introduction, we made mention of the Global Islamic Economic Summit taking place in Dubai on the 5th and the 6th of October. Do you want to take us through the what, who, when, and why of the summit?
Of course. So the Global Islamic Economy Summit is the flagship event for the government of Dubai in fulfilling their aspiration to promote the development of the global Islamic economy. We have about 2,500 policymakers and practitioners coming from all the different aspects of the Islamic economy, covering Islamic finance, halal food, family friendly travel, Muslim media, and various other aspects. And really, what happens at these conferences is that it starts the conversation around promoting and development and creating synergies between these different pillars. What you traditionally find, whether it's Islamic finance, whether it's halal food or any industry, is that these sectors are very silo based. So they operate within their markets, they don't reach global marketplaces, and they're not able to have synergies with each other, although there's a lot of shared principles and shared values in these areas. So what we do is that we bring all of these institutions together and we help initiate the dialogue that will lead to its development. And this year, it's a very interesting event. We have over 60 speakers from all over the world. We have a number of executives that represent different institutions. We have representatives from Nestle, Coca-Cola. We have Facebook. We have all the CEOs of the largest Islamic banks, whether in UAE, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, etc., participating. We will be having Muhammad Yunus participate as well, who is a pioneer when it comes to social finance and ethical finance, and Nobel Peace Prize winner from Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. We will have His Royal Highness Emir Sanusi from Nigeria, the Emir of Kanu, participating as well, and he is also considered a pioneer when it comes to addressing some of the key issues facing Islamic markets, issues of mismanagement, financial mismanagement, corruption, nepotism, etc. We will hear his views on these issues. So we are very excited by this conference, and we hope that as many people who are interested in the space, who are stakeholders in the space, are able to participate, join the discussion, join the debate, and really set the agenda for the growth and development of this market going forwards. We always follow up the conferences with very actionable solutions. And one of the key things that came out from last conference on the Islamic finance side and on the halal economy side was the requirement for standardization across different markets. What previously happened is that if you were operating in a halal sector in one market, you could not export to other markets because standards and certification systems are very, very different. What we were able to help engage in the last 2 years was institutions like SMIC, institutions in the Gulf cooperation countries, to come together to try to standardize the various different practices they have. And that is having a huge impact that is being felt now, which was originated through the conversations we had in that conference. Another area on the Islamic finance side was this concept of moving towards the universal principles and ethical principles, and to be able to attract and be an inclusive industry. And since the conference, we have seen institutions like Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, Noor Islamic Bank, and various others really take this on board and champion being an inclusive segment. And we feel that this time it will be the same. We follow up the conference with a white paper that captures all the key discussions and key outcomes, and we follow that up by sending it to all the different policymakers that are in the region, and we share that with governments, with key clients, etc., to develop actionable roundtables where these key stakeholders that are able to implement these initiatives come together and really drive a way forward. So we had about 4 or 5 different roundtables covering various aspects in 2014 and 15, and we expect to follow up this conference with a series of roundtables as well to be able to action many of the resolutions that come out of this conference.
That was Mustafa Adil. We say Jazakallah for joining us on Morning Rush this morning. We wish you and your organization and the conference all the best for the future. We say Jazakallah and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh.
That was Mustafa Adil, who is the acting head of Islamic finance for Thomson & Reuters, talking to us about the state of the Islamic finance in the world economy and giving us a preview of what's happening at the Global Islamic Economy Summit in Dubai on the 5th and the 6th of October. You are watching Morning Rush. Stay tuned.